So welcome at the .VVM community meetup. We had a slight few months long break in these meetups because there was plenty of other activities to do, but we would like to return to this like 1 month cadence of these events. So I hope that for next month we will get another topics to talk about. Before Standa will have the session about the new things in .vvm 4.2, specifically the validation in static commands and using the metrics API. I have one announcement that is quite important. Recently, Gitter, which was a popular place for our community, they made a new version of the application, and the content inside this application stopped appearing in Google. And because there was a lot of questions and a lot of answers, and we wanted people to be able to search in Google for this content, we have decided to move to some other place. Also, there was several other things we didn't like much. That the Gitter supported thread conversation, but a lot of people didn't find the right buttons to start the thread. So, like, if there were two simultaneous questions, like the replies were quite mixed up. So we have set up an application called Discourse on this domain, forum.vvm.com, and anyone can sign with the GitHub account or with a normal username password, and we encourage everyone to post questions into these categories. We have this English category for the worldwide audience and also the Czech category. So we have set it up like last week, so now it's still empty, but feel free to start and post questions there. The .vvm team will be monitoring these discussions, so if there is any questions, we can try to answer them. So this is the announcement. We have also sent the newsletter recently, so more people should know about this place. And if you go on Gitter, there is a link to this forum as well. So I hope that this discussion will move to this new place, which should be much better indexed by Google, and you can post links to individual questions and things like that. So like I've created this thread, and it has some link in the URL, so like you can provide links for your questions. It's also easier for us when people are asking the same thing repeatedly. We can just give them link to the answer. It was possible for in the Gitter also, but it wasn't that straightforward, and also sometimes it was difficult to like find the right conversation. So now what's new in .vvm 4.2? Basically, I have counted number of pull requests which have been merged since 4.1, and we have about 25 pull requests. I didn't count these who were like connected to the like DevOps pipelines and like release, because there was a few pull requests just fixing some things in our publish pipelines. So I'm not counting these. So these all 25 pull requests contain some tiny features, or mostly the bug fixes and small improvements, like better error messages in some cases and things like that, and or like fixes of regular bugs. And also there is one feature which is a bit interesting, and basically .vvm has two modes of rendering: the client side, which is the default, and on specific places you can turn on the server side rendering, which should produce like better HTML for search engines and things like that. And since we introduced these two modes, we started like thinking, do we even need these two modes? Can we have just one mode? But it's not that simple. But at least we are trying to move these two modes like closer to each other, so the number of differences would not be that high. And one of these changes is that if you are using value binding in for some attribute, and this is the client-side rendering. There is no server-side rendering. Then previously in .vvm 4.1, we emitted just this data bind attribute. So this attribute value was set only in the JavaScript. Now we will try to evaluate the expression on the server, and we will like render this attribute. We will render this attribute automatically on the server, so it should be much better indexed by the search engines because it doesn't require any JavaScript. In the server-side rendering mode, this was already produced, and also this was rendered. So if the value changes, like this expression could be updated. But in the client rendering mode, this wasn't rendered. So now this will be rendered as well. And we have also recently published the Visual Studio Code extension, and a few days ago we have published a new version which has several bug fixes and some improvements. So if you are not using the big Visual Studio, feel free to try the extension and give us feedback, because we really appreciate that, and we want to like make the experience for VS Code users better as well, because there are a lot of people who are using .vvm on Linux or on Mac OS. Another feature which is not merged in the main branch yet, but we are working on it, is support for custom primitive types. And the use case for that is typically when people want to use strongly typed IDs. The idea is that if you have, I don't know, customer ID, order ID, and some other IDs of some like domain objects or model objects or things like that, and if the ID is declared as good, it's very easy to confuse or mismatch these IDs. So like you will assign some customer ID to a field called order ID, and there is no like compile time check. But if you create a specific different type for each ID, then like you are not able to assign order ID into customer ID and vice versa. So we wanted to add support for that because it's a quite popular pattern, and there are also several NuGet packages which implement base classes for these IDs. So basically we have this type ID class, and basically it just has this GUID property ID value, and it has some constructor where you can set this. There is a create new static method, create existing, where you will put this ID, and there are some functions for parsing the value to string, like just reports this ID value to string and things like that. And so this is the base class, and I have created a sample ID which basically inherits from type ID of sample ID and just defines a public constructor, and basically that's it. And if you want to use this type in .vvm, you can, because it's serializable in JSON, and we already have the support for records. However, the problem is that you will not be able to use it on several places. Like, for example, in the route, if you would want to use this ID, it's not possible. Or if you want to, for example, use the combo box and use it in the item value binding, there is a requirement that this type has to be primitive type. And this is not a primitive type. It's basically an object which has some properties inside. But if you mark this with this custom primitive type and tell .vvm that basically it's my custom type, it's not primitive, it's an object, but it will serialize as GUID on the client, or more precise, GUID nullable, because this is an object, it can be null, it's legitimate. And you will give it some kind of primitive type converter, which will help .vvm to figure out how this thing is serialized, how it's parsed, how it's like converted to string. Then .vvm will treat this type as a primitive type. So it will serialize it as like not as an object in JSON, but just as the GUID. So basically it will output the GUID printed in the double quotes. And also it will you will be able to use it in combo box, in route links, route parameters, and things like that. And this converter basically needs to implement this interface I custom primitive type converter. And basically there are two methods, from custom primitive type and to custom primitive type. And .vvm will do the rest of the things. It will use its own it will inject this into the serialization, so you don't need to write your serializer for that class. Basically, this will generate also the newtons of JSON converter to perform these conversions. So you will just give it a conversion methods to the primitive type and from the primitive type, and that's it. Typically, it can be done as a generic version, so you will write this converter only once, and then you can use it for all your type IDs in your application. So this is how it works. And then we can, oh, sorry, I didn't want to go here. Then in the view model, you can just use these types, and you can use it in route, in query string, in combo boxes, and it can be nullable or non-nullable. Yeah, so you can use it in static commands, you can use it in commands as parameters, like everything which you will need. And if I will show the page, it's in different directory. It's here. So here you can see it's just normal.html file. So I'm using this item ID normally in this binding. It will be just converted to string and written in the page. It can be used here in the selected value and in item value binding. It can be used for validation also. Yeah, so it's quite powerful. And on all places where you would expect this would be supported, it should work. So this is the custom primitive types. It's not present in the latest preview of .vvm yet. We have a few days ago, we have published .vvm 4.2.0 preview 03 final. So this version, it was published 2 days ago. So you can try it, but this custom primitive types is not there yet. I guess it will be there in the next public preview. And the main two features which Standa will talk about is the validation in static commands, and also a support for System.Diagnostics.Metrics, which will allow you to track what's going on in your application. So now I will hand over to Standa so he can show you the demo.
Hi. Let me just share my screen. So I would like to show first validation in static commands. So I guess you know what static command is, but just to be sure, this is like a simplified diagram from the DotVVM documentation on how the lifecycle works. And this is what everything what happens when you execute a command, and a static command is basically like we drop everything that is not needed and only call the one function that you want to invoke. So obviously static commands are much lighter. They only transfer the method arguments and then the method result. So you are usually transferring much less data and it's quicker. Obviously there are some limitations, and up to this point, one of the main limitations was that you couldn't send back validation errors to display them, or you had to do that manually. It was obviously always possible. We now even have an official JavaScript API for attaching those errors. So some people in our company were doing this all the time, but now we will have a much simpler way of doing things. So this is what a classic static command looks like. It's the name of the binding is static command because originally it was intended for calling static methods. Then we figured out that maybe you want to call them on some services from your dependency injection. So now you import the service into the .html markup using the service directive. It doesn't matter. I hope my pointer is visible, but and then you can invoke this method in the static command binding. Static command binding is very different from command. It's actually more similar to a value binding because we translate it to JavaScript. If you use a function which is not annotated using this allow static command, we will try to translate it to JavaScript. So if you use your own function and just forget to add this attribute, it will fail because we don't know how to translate it. But if you use, for example, list.add, we will translate it to array.push or something. So we call this method and only transfer like this string done and the ID of the task. I usually will transfer more data. This is like a silly simplified example, but the point is made. And then after this method succeeds, you just client side set the state to done. So otherwise you are not refreshing the data. So you would set the state to done, but not show it client side. And you can also use static commands to only do these client side things. You don't even have to invoke the server there. So what we have now in the preview is, we call it manual validation. It's manual because you create this static command model state class and then add validation errors. You will do that in a condition. This is just to make it the code shorter to fit on slides. So I will add an error to the label on the form argument, and the DVM will then translate it to the actual path in the view model and attach the error, and then you just show it client side using the validator control or attach properties or the validation summary control. And I'll show you an example in a minute. We are now working on getting done this automatic validation. This is probably what you are used to from command bindings. You just attach attributes on your properties, and they are invoked, and the validation errors are handled automatically, and your method doesn't even get called when there are errors. Or you can implement the validatable object on your class. By the way, this is in commands. This is done using .vvm request context .model state. If you want to do something similar, we didn't want to force you to inject .vvm request context because it's just annoying just to add one error. So we just allow you to create this model state ad hoc, and if you call this file on invalid model state, it will throw an exception that .vvm did processes. So I would like to show you the code in practice, or in practice in my silly example. The example is just a task list, and to have something to validate. First, we validate that the labels of the tasks are present. I have this property required, but it's currently ignored, but we will not validate it now. And this automatic will also not work. I have to change it back to manual. And then what you actually cannot do using the validation attributes is to validate something that it does not conflict with something else in your database. So my to-do list is forcing me to only have one task per day. Because I'm a bit lazy. And the page is like a simple table with the data, and then auto-generated form with the 2 fields and a button. And the button, the S is the service, and we just call the create function, which is this one. And the create function then returns back the task. That's like a common pattern. And view model and for the form and view model for the table. But it's a common pattern to then return back the inserted data because, for example, this will attach an ID, so which is then needed in something else. And then we reset the form to back to the initial state. It was actually running already. So this is the task list. There is like one task which is already done. This is not done. And one more task on this day. It's today, I think. It will say that you are too busy on that day, which is, sorry. It executes up to this point successfully and then adds the error. It will also add multiple errors if I also have an empty label. This method does not throw an exception. It does not fail, so it will continue up and also add this other error. So it does not work. Why? Really? I guess demo effect. What if I actually try to insert the task? Now it works. I don't understand. Maybe I will debug why it did that. Maybe there is a bug in the framework. It's we implemented this feature not that long ago, and it's not battle tested, to say it lightly. It's not tested much, so there may be some refuges. I hope it's not a bug, but maybe. So, and well, maybe you might ask, why is it necessary to allow this manual? If I would delete this, it would throw an exception is not enabled on the static command. If it's manual anyway, maybe we could detect that it has thrown an exception. And the reason for manually enabling the validation is that if you submit a command, we always clear all validation errors on the page. But we didn't do that with static commands. So people were using static commands to, for example, run something every 5 seconds in the background, which if we started clearing the errors on every static command, now we would just clear the errors every 5 seconds, which is probably not something you would want. So you have to enable it manually. I have this other static command which does not have the validation enabled, and which is for these buttons. And if I click on done, these errors are not cleared. If this binding would have been command binding, not static command, the errors would clear. In this case, it doesn't matter too much, but it's something to be aware of. So that's my example. As I said, there may be some rough edges, but we would like to you to try it out and give us some feedback. And I apologize for the bugs if there are any. So another feature in DotVVM 4.2 is we have a support for System.Diagnostics.Metrics, which is a standard interface in .NET. And I will show you an example how to connect Prometheus onto the DotVVM application, or how to set up the Prometheus server library for ASP.NET. So I swapped the slides, sorry. So Prometheus is a commonly used monitoring service. It's basically just a time series database, which is automatically inserting data by sending GET requests to all of services that are configured there. And the services basically just say, this is like my time series with some labels, and this is the value that you should store. And then you use some other solution, most commonly Grafana, I would say, to display some dashboards. Or Prometheus, I think it has built-in support for setting up some alerts based on the metrics, like if your request times go above 5 seconds on average, maybe someone should know about it. So we will send an email to one of the developers. So I will not show you how to configure Prometheus. It can get quite complicated if you want it complicated. And we implemented few DotVVM specific metrics. The Prometheus library already has support for ASP.NET, like request counts and timings. So we just like enrich that with .vvm labels so that you can sort them based on the route name and not just query path, which and then some .vvm specific things like the number of validation errors is there, and size of the VM model may be quite interesting for some applications. So the guide how to set it up, it's pretty standard. You can basically go based on the Prometheus .NET documentation. You have to, or you don't have to do this, but it will add support for the ASP.NET metrics. It will instrument all the requests. And then this other call will add /metrics endpoint, which is what the Prometheus then ingests. And what is needed to support all the system diagnostic metrics is to start this meter adapter to listen. And I'm not going to explain this line in much detail, but it basically, we have some pre-configured buckets in the DVM which you can use, but if you don't even have to use this line, it's just to make the metrics a little bit better, I would say. So the setup in this application is the slides are screenshot from this application, so it can't even be different. So I did a few things to the running app, and this is like the raw data for Prometheus. And but you can read it reasonably well. For example, here we have like static command invocation seconds. It's a histogram, so this is the number of static commands which executed in less than 7 milliseconds, and it was 6 out of 7 of them. So yeah, they are running reasonably. I guess the first one was slower because the .NET was just cheating the method. And there are the metrics for view model size and a few other things. You can look into the details if you are interested in this. These metrics should have some documentation on them, like size of the view model, JSON and bytes. So that's it from me. So I will hand back to Tom.
Great. Thanks for this demo. I will return to the slides. Basically, I don't have more content right now, but if you have any questions, feel free to ask us, and we will try to set up this like another meetup next month. It should be like similarly like this month, so it will be like at the end of the month. And if you want to if you don't want to miss it, just follow us on Twitter, or you can watch at the meetup.com/.vvm. Maybe I will show the page. Meetup.com/.vvm. We will publish all the meetups on this site. So if you like register or join this group, then you will get notified about the next .vvm community meetup. So if you watch us on these channels, you will know about this. Oh, sorry, I'm not sharing my screen, I guess. Yeah, so meetup.com/.vvm. Yeah, like this. Yeah, so if you join this group, then you should be notified about the meetups. And we will also post the invitations of the meetups on the new forum. So if you join the forum or watch the categories, this English one, for example, if you watch this category, you will also know about the community meetup. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask us. And also the next meetup should be like sometime next month. So stay tuned.